film you can see, and some more film with some actual exposed frames on it. Hello! Today I'm going to talk about the job of spotting list creation. The job title for this could be English editor, spotting editor, spotter, or more generically just part of the English department or international versioning department. When I worked in an English department, I didn't have to do a lot of spotting. This is the kind of thing where to get work done on overlapping schedules, you might have people in the department who specialize in one thing over the other. So I specialized more in the dialogue list creation and some other things instead of the spotting list creation, but I know the basics of it, and it's sort of goes hand in hand with the dialogue list creation. This is something that is primarily for theatrical releases, so movies, films, not so much for TV shows. You start with a dialogue list and you will make modifications to it to generate the spotting list. Or, you know, sometimes you have to create the spotting list from scratch, but it's a lot easier if you can start with someone's dialogue list. So if you're freelancing on a project, you should request to see if a dialogue list is available that you can use as a starting point. So the spotting entries are used for subtitling. The dialogue list was used for dubbing, which is replacing the audio track with the voices of the people speaking a foreign language. The subtitles are superimposed text in the foreign language over the bottom of the screen. So if you've seen a movie with subtitles, you know that there are limits on how many words can appear at once, and thanks to good old-fashioned film, this is some film you can see, and some more film with some actual exposed frames on it. Because of film, and because a lot of movies still release on film or are shot on film, there are special requirements to keep in mind because it's not all digital. There is an actual physical thing at the end of it that has to be considered. So if you have not seen too much film, I might do a whole video just explaining what film is like. This is probably about 200 feet of film for a trailer with some leader around the edge, which is in the other color, and then the dark color is the actual film, although it has some unexposed film at the beginning as a leader also. So spotting list really has to know a little bit more about physical film and the constraints of working with something that you actually have to touch and cut and manipulate, and that only so much of it can fit on a reel, on a projector at a time. It's not this sort of infinite, unbounded thing that digital video is. Although a lot of movies are moving into the digital realm, and you will see the subtitles get a little bit more flexible and imaginative as technology advances, but the spotting list is still created with this basic understanding of the constraints of physical film. A couple of the constraints on subtitling are that it needs to be restricted to 80 characters. So if you're familiar with Twitter, then I think that's 140 characters. So a subtitle is shorter than a tweet. It needs to remain on screen between 1 second and 8 seconds, and it can only appear on 2 lines. So those are some of the limitations that when you're creating the spotting list you need to be aware of. I'm not going to say that 100% you have to stick to 80 characters, because that's really the rule for the translator, not the person originating the English version. But the closer you keep to the guidelines, the easier it is for the translator to also adhere to the guidelines. So you can't cheat too much, although, you know, I've seen it where it's like, but we need to add a period at the end of the sentence and that makes it 81 characters. That usually is okay. You can get away with doing that, but in general try and stick within the guidelines of 80 characters and the duration and 2 lines of text. I'm not going to get into the nuances of how you would break up the text, or what should be one line, what should be two lines, what to do when there are two different people speaking. I'm just going to continue going over the basics. So you put the in time and you put the out time for the subtitle, and hopefully you have some software that calculates the duration of that, or you have to do it manually, which is no fun having to do a lot of math. Then you put who is speaking, and unlike the dialogue list where you only needed to put who is speaking, on a spotting list you also need to put who they are speaking to. So right now, if I was in a spotting list, it would say Camille to audience, or Camille to viewer, or however you wanted to phrase the person on the other end of this digital experience who is watching my video. Then you put the actual text of the subtitle, and occasionally you will need to also include an annotation, but I will do a different video about what an annotation is and how to write them. Walla is usually not included in subtitles, so if there's a crowd scene, you don't have to worry about that unless there's someone angry in the crowd or enthusiastic in the crowd and they shout out something that is very distinctly heard as separate from the crowd. So then you would spot that, but in general, background crowd noises don't need to be included. You also do need to include signs that would need to be translated, and usually when you have signs that need to be translated, you also have to make sure you include a note in the spotting list that the position of the subtitle might need to change based on where that sign is, because you don't want the text, your translation, and the original sign to overlap. So you might have to include a note that says, there's a sign at the bottom of the screen, so please put the subtitle at the top of the screen. You try not to hide any actors' faces with the subtitle as much as possible. I mean, sometimes you have to, if their face is the whole thing you see, but in general, they're sort of just right here, and it's considered a fairly safe area for the subtitle to appear. But you do have to pay attention if it needs to move somewhere else. As a subtitle editor or spotter, you will also then have to watch back the list that you've created on the video. So that is why it's also really helpful if your client has a video system that they supply to you, so that it automatically superimposes the text you're writing over the picture. If you don't have that ability, it can be really hard to create a spotting list just sort of guessing how the subtitles are going to look. So you have to watch it back and just make sure that the reading speed that you've timed these at is reasonable, that a normal person is not going to either panic that they didn't have enough time to read it, or spend so much extra time staring at a short subtitle that should have been gone that they miss some important action that's going on in the actual movie. So you need to be a little bit more in tune with what it's like to read subtitles while you're watching a movie. You will also have to sign a non-disclosure agreement if you take a job in this field as a subtitler. And if you're working from home, the video that gets sent to you will likely have watermarks all over it, your name, the date, the company that provided it to you, so that you can't pirate the video in any way. And your non-disclosure agreement means you don't talk about the movie until it comes out in theaters and you could have otherwise reasonably have seen the film. Why does this job exist? I've sort of already hinted at that, but this is the template that goes to the translators for all the countries that prefer to do subtitles instead of dubbing. Some countries prefer dubbing, some prefer subtitles, so that's why the dialogue list and the spotting list both need to be created. With the spotting list, then you are starting with all the foreign languages being sort of uniform in how they're placed and how long they're on screen, and then it's up to the translator who's working on the subtitles for their individual country to decide if a word in their language is much longer or shorter, and if the times of the subtitle could reasonably be adjusted. But you don't have to worry about that once you've created your original spotting list template. That's up to them. So you just need to make sure that for the English, if this was playing alongside the movie in English, that you could read everything, that you understood the plot of the movie, and that it's not hiding any important action. The spotting list also gets included in something called a combined continuity and spotting list, or CCSL, which has the dialogue list, the spotting list, something called continuity, which I'll do a different video on, and something called annotations, which I will do another different video on. But the biggie is that it gets sent to a translator. I'm going to show you now an example of a spotting list. I'm just going to create it from one of my own videos, so it's not going to be too exciting, but it'll let you see the basic format of what a spotting list should look like. When we worked on Pirates of the Caribbean,
"69 characters in that one, 42, and you can see this is the original dialogue list, so it's ready to be repurposed into this other format for the spotting list. This indicates that there's something in italics in this one, the narrative title is left in place, and there's a note that there is a narrative title over the picture, so to watch out for that.
When we worked on Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, there's a scene you might go look up where Jack Sparrow talks about the cuttlefish. First of all is English fluency. You need to be very familiar with all of the rules of English grammar so that the subtitle template that you're creating doesn't have any errors in the English. You'll need to be able to use software that will be supplied by the client or that they recommend that you use to create the subtitles. Again, you don't want to have to be calculating durations of subtitles in a movie that could have 1,000 subtitles, and you've then had to do math 1,000 times and double check your math 1,000 times to make sure that you didn't make any mistakes in your math, because math for time code is not the same as regular math. When you're working on a film, you might not be working in time code. You might be working in something called feet and frames. So again, that is how many, you can see this little piece I've cut here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames. How many frames then would take up an actual foot of real film? So you need to be aware that that's where feet and frames come from. It comes from the physical medium of film. And if you're going to be doing math then, based on film or time code, it's not the simple base 10 math that we use every day. It's different based on what size the film is that the movie is being released in, based on the time code source that's used. Is it 24 frame or 23 frame time code? Is it PAL at 25 frame time code? Is it NTSC at 29.97 or at 30 frames per second? So it's much easier to do these calculations if the client supplies you some software or they recommend some software to you to use. You will most likely have to take an English test to get this job. The test is almost always open book, and you are allowed to use the internet or any source materials that you might think are helpful. If you're at a company, that department probably has style guides sitting around that they'll let you use, and they probably have a dictionary that they will let you use, or they will say, you know, go online, we use Webster's dictionary, only use their dictionary, or we only use Oxford dictionary, only use their dictionary. So each different company will have a set of standards for how they prefer the style of their English to be presented. You just have to learn which one they want and follow that the best that you are able to. The test will also probably include some proofreading items. Unless you're trying to specifically be a proofreader, it's not to make sure that you catch every mistake. It's not going to have nuanced mistakes probably. It's going to have pretty blatant mistakes like the wrong person identified as speaking in a scene, or, you know, some really big spelling error that you should be able to obviously see, because you probably won't have, like in Word where it underlines in red what's spelled wrong, because they don't want you to get that hint. They want you to be able to see that something is spelled wrong and research and find out the correct answer for how it should be spelled. I have never encountered a company where adequate training is given for this job, unfortunately. If you freelance, you will be expected to already know how to do this and what you're doing. If you go to a company, they will probably say, oh yes, we will train you, don't worry, you'll get training. But it is very unlikely that you will get sufficient training. Your training will probably be along the lines of, here's the software, here's how you mark the in time, here's how you mark the out time, here's where you write your information, go to work. So the more self-motivated you are, the more of a self-directed learner you are, the better you will do at this kind of job. What kind of person makes a good spotter? Unlike the dialogue list, where it's more to my personality, where I want to just do exactly, write everything as it's heard, where I don't need to interpret anything or try and guess, or how long does this look like it should be up, what does it feel like is the right thing. I just want to, this is this. So to be a spotter, you have to be a little bit more freewheeling. You have to be really confident that if you change the wording of something to make it fit your character limit, that it's a good change that's not going to change the meaning of what's said or be questioned by anyone down the production line. As I mentioned in the dialogue list video, the biggest downside to working in an English department is that your workflow is dependent on the editing room. And it is very common for an editing room to say, it's 4th of July weekend, let's make our deadline Thursday afternoon before 4th of July weekend. So you will get files Friday morning, and your deadline will probably be that Monday or Tuesday right after the holiday. So be prepared. You will have to work a lot of holidays. The good news is if you do the spotting list, you usually can wait until the dialogue list has been created or updated before you have to come into work. So for instance, on Thanksgiving, a dialogue list editor is much more likely to have to go into the office on Thanksgiving Day, while the spotting person can come in the day after Thanksgiving once there's some dialogue list that's already been updated or created that they can then work off of. So from that standpoint, the spotter has a little bit of an easier time, but then they're pushed up against the deadline more fiercely than the dialogue list editor. The dialogue list editor has more time to get everything done. The spotting list person probably a day or two less, just because they're working after the dialogue list is completed. The pay, as I mentioned on the dialogue list video, if you can get a job in an English department and you can do various different job things within that department, dialogue list creation, spotting list creation, annotations, maybe creative letter writing, continuity writing, coordinating with the clients, then it is a job that is sufficient to pay your bills. And because of the amount of overtime required, it can actually be a pretty good job, provided that you are an hourly employee and not a not a salaried employee. If you're freelancing, I don't know if if there's enough spotting work to sustain a person as just doing that. And freelancing, you always have the option of turning a project down. So for freelancing, they will tell you what they pay to do the work and when the work is due. And then it is up to you to know how long every job takes you, and if they've given you sufficient time and sufficient money to make that time worth spending. So I hope I have helped you figure out a little bit if spotting editor is something you might be interested in pursuing, or that at least I've given you a little bit better understanding of when you see one of those big office buildings on television that has a studio logo on it, what some of the people in there might be doing from 9 to 5 in Hollywood. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them below. And don't forget to subscribe so you can see all my videos, which are about all sorts of different things. But this series particular is about what people in Los Angeles do as jobs, as regular day-to-day kind of jobs.